Welcome to ESSA TV. Today we're joined by Professor Beth Webster, who is the Director of the Centre for Transformative Innovation at Swinburne University of Technology. She's also the Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research Impact and Policy. Her expertise centres on the economics of the way knowledge is created and diffused through the economy. She has a PhD in economics from the University of Cambridge and a Master in Economics and a Bachelor of Economics from Monash University. She is a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and Australia. Professor Beth, thank you for joining us today. So the first question, what current Australian policy do you think is hindering the future of Australia's economic prosperity? What do you think Australia is doing well? What kind of policy would have the most impact to secure Australia's future economic prosperity?
So I think there's three main areas where we're doing poorly. Well, not as badly as we could, but where there's room for improvement. First is, I think we relied too much on monetary expansion and low interest rates for stimulation to aggregate demand. Unless you have a balance between fiscal and monetary policy, you get a situation where you're just exacerbating booms and busts. So you do need a certain level of exogenous injection of demand into the economy to stabilise it, and that generally comes from government. Second is, I think we're paying too little attention to inequality in the workforce. We do fairly well on taxes and transfers, but in terms of wages, particularly the underpayment or the avoidance of paying proper wages, we are doing poorly. This is leading to an underclass of people who are poorly paid and intergenerational disadvantage. Now, we're not doing as badly on this as the US, where we can see the rise of people like Donald Trump, I assume largely because of these problems. In America, since the 1970s, the median full-time male wage has not increased at all in real terms, and that's just amazingly shocking, really. But we're not doing particularly well either. So I think that's an area where we need to pick up. But the third area, which is probably what I want to talk more about, is the area of industry policy. To create really competitive industries in a country or a region, it takes decades. It's not something you can suddenly pull out of a rabbit's hat. You need a lot of building up of clusters of capability, and you can see that in the industries where we are competitive in, like mining and agriculture. It's not just the farmers and the miners who are highly productive. It's that whole web of supporting industries, from component suppliers to R&D to the education system to the finance sector to the government. They all understand the industry and they work together to support it. And that's what keeps that industry on the frontier, and that's what keeps our standard of living high in Australia. Now, we're at a little bit of a crossroads now for a couple of reasons. Thermal coal is going to disappear as a major export or as a major source of wealth, full stop, because of climate change. And there's a big shift in the geopolitical shift in economic power between away from Europe-based economies towards Asian-based economies. So we've really got to be agile on our guard, and we can't just rely on those one or two industries. So we should be talking about using our very advanced capabilities in high-tech areas and in research to generate new industries. So, for example, we have a slight advantage in medtech industries, but we really haven't exploited it. It's just sort of happened, and we don't really support it in a fulsome way. So I think one of the areas where particularly society and government can improve that situation is by having stable industry policies, and we do not have that. And that is partly because within the political system, industry policy is considered unimportant and very low down on the agenda. And you get ministers of industry coming in, this is not universally the case, but often coming in and just seeing it as a stepping stone to something else in their career, and they're not really interested in saying, how can I really change and make more efficient some of these industries within Australia? So I think that's the area where I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot we can gain by having better policies.
How do you think technology will change the labour market in the next 5 years? And what's your take on the question that everyone wants answered? Will robots take over our jobs?
If we're lucky, robots will take over our jobs, because robots are a way of getting rid of dirty and basically unsafe jobs and getting machines to do them instead. So hopefully we will get to a stage where we only have 1 or 2% of the workforce in manufacturing, because our manufacturing factories are so highly productive. And you can already see this. There are some factories that are already that productive. You look at some of the car industries and you see hardly anyone on the shop floor. You go to some of the mineral processing industries and there's just a few people sitting in a control tower and a whole lot of, the dirty and dangerous work going on down the floor below, largely done by machines. These are called dark factories. They have so few people actually on the floor, they don't bother to turn the lights on. So yes, I hope robots will take our jobs, but that does not mean that there won't be other jobs for humans to do. So there are going to be there are a lot of things that still we need to do. There's a lot of issues in mental health, early death from cancer and pain, climate change, and there's a lot of industries that they're sort of negating the negatives, but a lot of industries on the positive side in terms of creative industries, enjoyment and pleasure of life. So our challenge is not to stop robotics and to hold on to those dirty, dangerous jobs, but to transition to a new economy. So one way of thinking about it is, imagine if technology stopped in the year 1800, what our lives would be like now. Imagine if our ancestors said, hold on, what about the poor old blacksmith or the weaver making cloth by hand? Let's hold on to their jobs. So imagine what our lives would be like. Certainly in those days when the industries died and new industries appeared, there was a lot of, not heartache, but a lot of serious losses through structural change, people losing their jobs and their livelihoods. I think we're in a position now to actually smooth that way and have retraining programs or other ways to facilitate the movement of people into other occupations, but certainly not to hang on to the old unproductive and probably highly unpleasant jobs.
So when you talk about taking the emphasis off R&D and shifting our focus onto how those technologies can be diffused into the economy, can you specify the practicalities of how that might happen?
Look, I think I'm thinking here about the whole developed world. So go back a few decades and there was quite a lot of both deductive logic and empirical work said, if we want to increase our standard of living and through raising productivity, we should do more R&D. Pretty sounds sensible. I'd certainly buy into that. And there's been a lot of effort over the last few decades to increase R&D spending through the tax system and through direct grants and things like that, consortia. And that's largely worked. R&D as a proportion of the workforce has gone up across the board. But the rate of growth of productivity has not gone up. In fact, it's gone down over the last 20, 30 years. So it's probably, if I was to say what can we do to make our research capability translated into more productive use, I'd probably look at actually taking R&D from that high-end research stage and diffusing it, turning it into developed useful products and diffusing it throughout society more, rather than just putting more scientists or employing more scientists. I'd look at actually the more downstream end of research.
Of not concentrating so much on the R&D aspect itself, but diffusing that downstream.
Yes.
What kind of practical policies do you see around that, or have other countries done it better than us in some way, and how do you? Yeah, what are the practicalities around that? Yeah.
So some countries have more advanced in that. US and Israel are some of the examples people use. And they've been doing this for decades. The US going back to after World War II. So the US has a lot of programs, and they're very stable ones, that they're here year in, year out, unlike the ones we have here in Australia, which evaporate very quickly. Whereby they give matching funds for high risk development of new ideas. They basically, a lot of the fabulous technologies in your iPhone or in the car have come out of the military, and the military is pretty much 100% paid for by taxes. So a lot of that, and the internet, for example, a lot of that really high risk stuff, was not done by private enterprise. It was done by government, by public sector organisations. And then it comes out of that and gets picked up by the civilian economy. So thinking along those lines, and there's been a lot of programs to sort of take some of the risk or increase the information, increase the diffusion of some of the technologies throughout industry, get industry together, get industry talking. Japan, back, in that miracle years when it was growing very strongly, the Ministry of Industry and Trade had quite an active role in bringing industry together and putting two parties who should be together and giving them sort of synergies so that they can go forward. So I think there is quite a few things you can do. Now, we do them in tiny little pieces and parcels around Australia because we're quite aware of what's going on, but the program will be killed after a few years. Or you've actually got to sustain good programs and grow them and not have them come and go in the way we do here.
And on that note, what is the most effective way of tackling multinational tax avoidance?
I think it's got to be international, and I know the G20 finance ministers were certainly onto it at one stage, and it needs to be consistently applied because it's very hard to crack down on it when you have offshore tax havens like Singapore or Switzerland or even the tiny little islands offering very, very low tax rates or almost zero company tax rates. It does need to be international, and I think you should just basically not black ban, but give special treatment to those tax avoidance tax havens and say, okay, if you're not going to be a reasonable citizen, you can't enjoy the benefits of a world where people do pay the right amount of tax. Because I can understand if you're efficient. Big corporation and your competitors are paying 1% tax because there's a tax haven, it's very, very hard for you to keep staying business, and pay the 30 or 20% tax.
When you talk about reskilling and programs for people to transition into a new career, how do you respond to people who say that they're 40 years old and have been in the same job their entire life?
How can you assure those people that somehow
there will be opportunities for them? Well, a lot of tradespeople leave their trade after the age of 40 because they're so heavy, so dirty, and often monotonous and repetitive. And they do move into allied areas anyway. So there is a lot of churn in the labour market. The main issue when there's restructuring is that it's imposed on people. They don't decide it themselves, and I think that's where the heartache is. So you find in the trades some move up, quite a few move up into management, some move sort of sideways into sales or more administrative roles. By late 40s, a lot, unless they're paid a lot of tradespeople aren't still in their trade of training. And the same would quite possibly apply to people in the auto industry or textiles, clothing, footwear industry, whereby there's been quite a bit of structural retraining. In banking, there's been a lot of people losing their jobs too. NAB just went through and dropped 3,000 jobs and no one blinked. But I think the key is there to offer a menu of choices for people to retrain. Most people want to work because they identify with work. They don't want to do horrible work, or they don't want to do work where they feel they're being exploited, but most people do want to work. So if you offer people a menu of choices, then I think that's probably the best way of avoiding that costly and emotionally and personally costly process of industry restructure. So, the government might run programs, you might give people vouchers to go and use wherever they like in the education system to retrain. And in some cases you have to give people literacy and numeracy or English language skills, so, depending on the actual person. So I think that approach is good, but the other thing you do need to do is you need to ensure the jobs are there too for them, because we know from studies on training that the value from training quickly evaporates unless they're actually applying what they know in actual use. So does come back to the government. We nowadays, 21st century, we see the government's job as to ensure there is enough employment in the economy. So that's when you come back to what I mentioned, fiscal policies straight up. That you can't, you do need to have a balance between fiscal and monetary policy. You can't just rely on low interest rates or fiscal monetary stimulation to keep the level of aggregate demand high.
When you talk about 95% of firms not being on the efficiency frontier,
it's a figure that's roughly speaking.
Yeah.
Maybe
I mean, I think it makes sense intuitively that not all of economic theory is 100% true.
but I wouldn't have placed a figure that high at 95%.
Yeah, it is quite high. Look, it depends on what you define as the efficiency frontier.
That's true.
Define it. But it's not as though everyone's sort of chasing each other and are overlapping, and we all sort of get there, except someone's a little bit behind.
Yeah.
The ones on the frontier stay on the frontier, and the laggards stay behind. Right. So there is something about the strong stay strong, and the weak just don't seem to die, and they don't seem to catch up.
Do you have some of the reasoning behind that?
Well, it is partly the virtuous circle or vicious circle, depending on where you are, of you're highly productive, you've therefore got the ability to hire the best workers in, and therefore to make the most audacious investments and make the most strategic partnerships, which keeps you on the frontier. And if you're weak, it's still like a high and low equilibrium. It's very hard to dig yourself out of the hole. And maybe, you can't afford to hire the best managers, or the managers don't have the confidence, or they, maybe, I have heard of situations of companies whereby they sort of see themselves going down, 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 and they've made the audacious plan to hop on the plane and go out and sell themselves to whoever in the world. And I've heard about the ones that succeed, but that is a really hard thing to do if you're not making a lot of profit, to suddenly say, okay, I'm going to spend 2 weeks going up and down Asia or through North America or Europe and try and sell my little widgets or whatever I'm making into a highly competitive market. It takes a lot to do that. Now, there are government programs to help you do that, but often they're very small. They might go for 6 years, and then a new minister comes in and they cancel it. They say, oh, it's this program, I don't like it. And so the industry policy is not helping us there. It's not helping us make the people who potentially could get there.
Thank you so much for your time today, Professor Beth.
Thank you very much again
Pleasure.
for your time
Thank you for
today.
having me.
Thank you so much.